Again, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to your institutional faculty training program. The topic given to me is quite challenging in that it is truly difficult to measure and observe outcomes in a very short period of time. But allow me to share my thoughts. And these have been culled from our efforts to embed sustainability in classes and initiatives of the university for about 25 years. I started doing this since I taught STS in 1999. As had been mentioned, I had been trained in chemistry and my research then was in polymers. So my colleagues here from the Department of Chemistry in UST, we used to work together on polymers. No? Initially, I was trying to modify polymers so that they could be biodegradable and would not have a negative impact on the environment. That was in 1992 or so. But at a certain point, I could not understand why I had to do such an expensive initiative when it would have been simpler if people simply changed their behavior. Thus began my uphill battle with changing mindsets and behaviors. Eventually, when I became a school administrator, it became a bigger challenge to change mindsets and priorities of all of students, not only students, but also faculty and fellow administrators. The opportunity came when in 2008, the General Congregation of the Society of Jesus, which is the worldwide meeting of the Jesuits, made a resolution to prioritize in their mission reconciliation with God, with others, and with creation. And so I used this as a foundation for the initiatives that we would do with all our other champions I worked with. It was not without resistance. At that time, people could not understand why we were banning single-use plastics. But eventually, it led to many transformations. So what I will share with you today are my reflections about what we have done over all these years. So let me begin with the end in mind. To redesign learning experiences towards sustainability, we need to know what constitutes impactful learning outcomes. Our experience in these learning is that these learning outcomes go beyond the usual knowledge, skills, attitudes that we focus on when we design our courses. Sustainability knowledge needs an ecological worldview and a systems perspective. Thus, the learning outcomes is not just about content, but the worldview and systems approach that is needed to understand our complex and wicked problems. A sustainability attitude involves also emotional and spiritual intelligence that leads to what we call ecological conversion, and I will talk more about that later. And finally, sustainability practices involve skills that have to guide sustainable behavior and action. So in designing learning experiences for these outcomes, we need to expand the horizon of our learners. And by these, I do not just mean our students, but also ourselves, faculty, staff, administrators. We need to deepen the person of our learners. We need to inspire action that would lead to a more sustainable world. We are therefore looking at an education and leadership that involves the development of the whole person, developing the mind, the heart, the hand. So let's begin with expanding the horizon. By this, we mean introducing other perspectives that may prove to be even disturbing. No? For our Gen Alpha, this may already be part of their world because of their exposure on issues on social media. But it means also that we, especially those who are from older generations, we have to go beyond our own comfort zones of teaching and learning and be disturbed by what is happening around. I'm not quite sure, for example, that my generation, the baby boomers, totally get this. No? Are we disturbed enough when we hear that we need 1.7 Earths to support the practices of 8 billion people? Do we need do we question why we need to consume more resources than the Earth has the capacity to regenerate? Learning cannot just end with facts and data, but they have to go into the challenging questions of our priorities and choices. Learning also, learning also needs to be critical of the action of our institutions, like government, industry, and society in general, to ensure that we are balancing our action to establish our social foundations and prosper within the limits of our planet. This is an illustration of what we call the donut economy, introduced by Kate uh, Rayworth. Let me just Michael, you're raising your hand. Should I answer this now? Can I get help from our moderators? I'm not quite sure if I should. Can you hear me? Is there a problem with the presentation? Are we okay?
Yeah, there's no problem in the presentation.
Okay, okay. So I was just wondering what, oh, okay. So where was I? Sorry. So this is the illustration of donut economy. And it was introduced by Kate Rayworth, who reminds us to move into this safe and just space for humanity, which means eradicating poverty to bring everyone above the social foundation and reduce global resource use so that we can go back within our planetary boundaries. No? And when you look at, there are some studies on this donut economy, no? So you can see that the more advanced economies, the richer economies like Singapore and China, they have practically Singapore has very few red points in the social dimension, but they have gone beyond the ecological ceiling, no? China also has overshot because of their efforts, no, for the use of energy, for the use of resources, but they still have a lot to do also with the social foundation. And compare that with poorer economies like ours, no? The Philippines, we have not overshot the planetary boundaries, but look at the dimensions under social foundation that we still need to address. The same with Sri Lanka. No? So what we see here is that ultimately we share one planet, and its resources are used by society, by industry, and by those in power. We all end up managing the wastes we generate, which can further cause disease and injustice. And those poorer people, the more vulnerable ones, are the ones who suffer most from these injustices, the climate injustice, we call it. We all end up dealing with the impacts of climate change and other atmospheric disturbances. So, how can we respect the Earth's rhythm so that it can generate its renewable resources? At the same time, how do we balance that when we prefer comfort, convenience, and wealth, which demand huge amounts of resources? The economy, those running the economy, also responds to these social demands by using up even more resources, ensuring that it generates wealth for its shareholders. This is the challenge of sustainability. How do we manage the tensions among society, economy, and the environment? I often refer to this as the sustainability imperative. Imperative because if we do not learn how to manage the tensions, we end up with more disruptions in our way of life and in the way we do business. And this is true for both the renewable and non-renewable substances. If we are subject to global warming, we have extreme weather, and of course that leads to disaster risk, financial risk, health risk, food security. If we use up our metal reserves, there is a resource risk, a regulatory risk, and so on. No? So there are disruptions in our way of life and the way we do business. No? And so what I'd like to I'd like to highlight in this talk is the bigger picture painted for us by Laudato Si. the call of Pope Francis to consider integral ecology in our way of life. I sometimes refer to integral ecology as sustainability plus plus because it highlights the ecology of the environment, society, and economy, but it also reminds us that we have to pay attention to cultural ecology, to ecology of daily life, the principle of the common good, and intergenerational justice. Thus, our learning experiences should highlight the interconnectivity of things. In our usual sustainability, we highlight the interconnectivity of things. We also need to understand the importance. Sorry, let me just show you. The feedback mechanisms are sometimes what do you call that? We forget that we are not dealing with cause-effect systems, but with a lot of feedback mechanisms in our ecosystems. No? We also need to understand and respect other cultures. No? Perhaps that is what I am missing in the sustainability. Sustainability focuses on society, environment, and culture, but it does not articulate respect for cultures. And sometimes we have to balance that. There are certain things in our culture that may sometimes create tension with the usual SDGs, but how can we manage that? How can we find a way to address both? No? We also have to look at the quality of life, no, from the ecology of daily life. We need to see what the setting is of the people, the way they live. And these settings, for example, do you live in an informal settler community, in a rural community? Because all of these influence the way we think, feel, and act. Human ecology is also about the common good. And I think it's very important to remember that common good is actually giving respect for the human person as well as the overall welfare of society. And then there is the solidarity among generations. The intergenerational justice, which highlights that this planet is only on loan to us. This is not really ours. It's only on loan for the time we are on this planet. And so the learning experience we design should also, beyond expanding the horizon, should also deepen our persons. It should develop our interiority so that we can listen to our interior self, to the motions of our soul. And developing that interiority means being able to discern. And discerning is defined as training to see what, especially when it is uncertain, when we don't know which is the better choice. We discern when we try to weigh options, when we try to make choices, when we are trying to decide what to do. And this begins with reflecting on our experience. And it's not just the external events, it's also the internal events, the experience inside, our thoughts and our feelings, our imaginings and desires, the attractions and the repulsions. Why do we need to do this? These lead us to a deeper understanding of ourselves, but hopefully also a deeper sense of what we are being called to do. What is our personal mission? What is our vocation? When we try to discern, we try to use reason. No? We try to look for the best option between two good choices using our reason. And that's very usual. No? I think that's very natural. But I think there's another part of it that we also need to sort of sharpen. We need learning experiences that sharpen our sensitivity to what goes on deep within our hearts. And that's about discerning with the heart. And it's usually important to remember using both discerning through reason and discerning with the heart, because it is what opens us also to grace, no? Being open to grace to help us determine if we have made the right choices or if we should change, whatever we are doing. The other aspect of deepening our interiority is actually listening to others. It's not just listening to ourselves, but listening deeply to others so that we can foster communication and empathy. And so that we can open our minds to other perspective and even change our minds if there is a need to do so. The reason for doing that is by opening our minds and our hearts, we are more open to undergoing what Pope Francis calls ecological conversion. And this means that we are acknowledging that we are only a very, very small part of a very, very big reality. And it means that we need to reflect on what this means in terms of our lifestyle or how to bring our community toward greater good. I used to teach STS, and let me share my favorite way of showing my students why we are part of a bigger reality. Science tells us that the fabric of the universe started with the simplest of elements, hydrogen and helium, forming stars. And within those stars, elements in the periodic table up to iron were formed. And it is and then where do the rest of the periodic table, where are they formed? They are the heavier elements are formed during supernovae, no? The elements heavier than iron. But what is so interesting is that all of these elements are on Earth. And if we look at the bigger picture beyond our solar system, we see even more amazing things. Our Milky Way is one of 100 billion galaxies in the universe, approximate. Of course, that's just an approximation. And each of these galaxies have about 100 billion stars. Some have 400 billion even. So that's a lot of stars to begin with. And among all these stars, we were gifted with our sun. The sun is host to the system where our Earth is so advantageously positioned. Advantageous because actually we started out as a dead planet, full of gases. And as the Earth cooled, then simpler compounds formed that eventually would form the molecules of life. And these molecules of life would give rise to biodiversity, which, if we are not careful, can be destroyed by irresponsible choices. So what we are seeing is that we have been gifted with such a wonderful creation. Can we see the world in a new way? Can we have a change of heart toward what Pope Francis calls ecological conversion? One learning experience that I turn to in my classes is called deep listening. It is a process that uh, um, help that can help shift our mindsets from entitlement to gratitude, from interest to calling. It's also this deep listening that allows us to rethink our values and behavior so that we can manifest our conversion, our conversion through our lifestyle, through the way we do things, through our practices. So now we have covered mind and heart. We now go to the third aspect of our learning outcomes, and that is, what do we want to see from the hand, from the action that accompanies our ecological conversion? Our learning experiences need to have opportunities so that we as learners develop sustainable habits or maybe undo unsustainable ones. So for example, you could have a list of these habits. Which habits do you already have? Which habits need to be stricken? How do we how do we position ourselves? And remember that sustainability and integral ecology is not just about the environment. It's also about social and economic issues. It's a balancing act among all of them. Okay. So Pope Francis, there are other cultures, there are certain lifestyles that we also need to rethink. For example, Pope Francis talks about a culture of consumption. We can easily get caught in a whirlwind of needless buying and spending because marketing drives us to do so. Now, if you're in business, there will be needless buying and spending resulting to what we call compulsive consumerism. But uh, there are also other things that can influence us. For example, when we put ourselves at the center of things, no, uh, it's always the absolute priority to focus on the self for the immediate convenience, and then all else become relative, even if it leads to environmental degradation and decay. Take, for example, our instant mentality. No? We have to, everything is instant, even when we shop. We have to get it immediately. No? And by doing that, it means that we use up fossil fuel for every parcel that comes to our doorstep. So those are things that we really need to rethink. So what are we called to do? If we are called to have ecological conversion, then we are challenged to have a new lifestyle, a lifestyle that is sustainable, that is just, that is deliberate. Okay? Now, this also has to be partnered with ecological education as universities. Now, our universities need to engage more in what we call ecological education. And I was able to listen in to the question on whether there should be a separate course on this. I share the previous speaker's mind thoughts that actually, well, you could have a separate course, but you could also embed it in existing courses. You can also embed sustainability mindsets in existing courses. And I think that's what we are all challenged to do to deliver ecological education. It's also important to remember, as I said, that it's not just about nature. Pope Francis highlights the fact that a true ecological approach always becomes a social approach because we have to listen to both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, the cry of the vulnerable. We are faced not with two separate crises, but a complex crisis, a crisis that demands an integrated approach so that we can combat poverty, we restore dignity to the excluded, and at the same time, we need to protect nature. So it's a very big challenge to do all things at once. And in a sense, the university is a good place to begin because it is here where students can start thinking and incubating their ideas about the future. Okay. So now we have spent a lot of time on learning outcomes, and it's important that they are clear to us. But now, how do we redesign those learning experiences so that they can lead us towards sustainability? One approach that we use in our university begins with experience that the learner can connect with, followed by reflection and then action. Hopefully, the experience impacts the learner, the reflection leads to insights that eventually will lead to meaningful action. To do all these, we use a whole of university approach. And I'll give some examples of what our Ateneo Institute of Sustainability has actually done with the help of our academic units, our support offices, and our partners. Okay. So let's start with the learning experience, the experience. No? And the learning experience have to be, the experiences have to be immersive, they have to be memorable, they have to be inspiring if they are at all to lead to impact and reflection. Okay. So let me share with you what we did before. This started in about 2008, no? Um, and we use this approach so that we could immerse the members of our community. For example, we started with environmental initiatives that started with a waste audit. We had a waste audit that involved students, that involved staff, especially from our cafeterias, no? The maintenance, faculty and administrators, no? But we also consulted a lot. For example, when we were doing our mobility efforts, there was a lot of consultation. So it's a very participatory approach to engage the different stakeholders. Okay. So this eventually led to initiatives like a new approach to segregating waste so that they could be put either in the materials recovery facility or in the composting facility. We also developed, what we call a building wastewater treatment system, or BWATS. And what happens here is that the septic tank effluent is collected and processed so that it is purified, and then eventually it is used to put it in a drip irrigation system for our garden, the one you saw up here. No? So they would be subjected to UV treatment and eventually go into the drip irrigation system. Okay. We also have a bigger system, which is the decentralized wastewater treatment system, or DWATS. Here, we use the effluent, the septic tank effluent of 7 buildings, and it goes into this DWATS facility. What happens here is that on top, you don't see anything. We can use this space actually for gatherings or for whatever other purposes, but underneath that, you will see that the action happens. No? The different chambers work out. And this is something that we prefer over a sewage treatment plant because STPs require chemicals, require manpower, require buildings, while this is a semi-natural approach to wastewater treatment. Interestingly, it was very difficult to convince. I'm not sure now if it's the Quezon City government or the Marikina. I can't remember which one, but they couldn't understand because they require a septic tank. A sewage treatment plant, an STP. And so when we presented to them our DWATS and BWATS, they couldn't make sense of it. They didn't want to approve it initially. Although this is actually better because the output can be used as irrigation, and we don't really need to throw anything out into the sewage system. No. So aside from that, we also have Egypt's bike lanes, and basically what we try to do is to make the entire campus a living laboratory. And this is where people can go on nature or sustainability walks, and we point out to them where we have the MRS, the detention ponds, where we have rainwater harvesting systems, where we have our wildlife sanctuary or arboretum, and so on. No? So we try to do this so that it is a real experience even for our kids, no? For the ones in basic education. We also have a variety of materials that and approaches, no, that highlight this experience, from our sustainability guidelines, from our toolkits, no, and we also have coloring books. These are games that have been developed. We have what we call the Ateneo Wild. Maybe you can also do a UST Wild. UP has followed suit. They also now have a UP Wild, where citizen science, citizens report the biodiversity in their campus. No? So it's a very interesting exercise. Now, whenever we have the opportunity, especially after sustainability walks, we also engage our participants and learners in reflection, challenging their current mindsets and behaviors, and encouraging them to think profoundly about the impacts of what we do, no? And make sure that they are able to connect with others later on. So what's important is, in the reflection, we try to need to make sense of integral ecology in our context. It always has to be localized. It always has to be understood from within our context. So how do we make sense of it and then move toward ecological conversion so that we can actually take action? Um, for example, uh, do we consider the well-being of the present generation now, no? But also, not just now, but we also, do we consider the well-being of future generations? And beyond that, even, do we consider the well-being of all creation, not just limited to people, no? And that hopefully will be the kind of reflection that leads to ecological conversion. And once we have done the reflection, we need to uh, inspire action, action that is purposeful, deliberate, and considerate. We uh, we need to translate this into actions that reflect the integral ecology. For example, through a sustainable lifestyle, through the respect for people, for creation, for cultures, in our personal lifestyle, but also in our institutional lifestyle. No? It could go into looking for ecological solutions. It could go into making ecological choices for the common good. And we ourselves could become champions of integral ecology, not just on campus, not just in the university, but also in the bigger society. We can also go from personal to the more institutional practices. How can we translate this to the level of the institution? For example, how do we translate respect for persons, for creation, for other cultures in our curriculum, in our policies as a university, in the structures and systems, for example, in the HR systems, in our institutional culture? How do we uh, how do we translate the choices about sound virtues, about common good and seventh generation principle, again, into curriculum, into policies and culture? Let me just say something about, we talked about common good briefly, no? This is for the good of society, for the good of human dignity, no? But seventh generation principle is something that is used in making long-term choices. For example, when we think of our choices, do we think of the children of the children of the children of your grandchildren? So we go down 7 generations and think of the impact of our choice to them. You know? In sustainable practices, we have less resources, less waste. We need to go more circular, more generative, more inclusive. And so we need to see how can we put that in our curriculum and courses? How can we put that in our policies, in our university structures and systems, in our culture? So again, looking at sustainable solutions and innovations and developing and supporting champions. This is what I have found quite important, no? In our work. We need to develop champions of sustainability. It cannot be just one institute or one person. You have to have a network of champions who will do this, for example, in basic education, in higher education, in the professional schools, in the HR group, in the especially in the physical plant group, no, in the management of the campus and the facilities, no. And we were so lucky because when we started this out in 2008, the person I was working with as part of the Loyola schools at that time happened to be promoted to become the director of our central facilities and maintenance office. And so he brings this wealth of sustainability mindset into the institution. And that is what we are actually challenged to do. How do we bring this to the level of the institution? Now, I'm sure that with your very creative minds, you can get to think of initiatives that will interest the different sectors in the community. What I have here are, for the design when we begin with experience, then go to reflection and action, what are the possible initiatives that we could include? So, for example, in experience, we could incorporate integral ecology experiences into the courses that we teach. No, so sometimes in STS, they encourage the sustainability walk. Or when we have a course here on, we call it Soksai 13, it involves sustainable development, but also the social aspects, no, the development aspects, the economy. And they include also games and exercises that will really incorporate this integral ecology experiences. Do we expose our students to the benefits of systems thinking? This is a little bit challenging because sometimes it's very difficult to think in systems, but what maybe the point here is not to do systems thinking as a technical aspect, but to ensure that we do not see things as cause and effect only. It's not linear. Sometimes our choices lead to unintended consequences. No, I remember before, you probably are familiar with the brick, the eco brick, where you have plastic bottles and you have to stuff that with used plastic wrappers and so on. And this became a program, right? And what happened is that in some cases, they would require students to bring eco bricks to school. Now, some families don't have that much plastic waste. So what they end up doing is buying more plastic so that they can fulfill the requirement of putting together an eco brick. No, so it had unintended consequences, and so the French person who actually designed it said it was not meant to be like that. No, okay. So what other things do we need to experience? We need to encourage deeper understanding of our own culture and identity. And I think for Filipinos, this is very much lacking. We need to really immerse ourselves in what our culture is and identity. In fact, we're so lost now in terms of our own identity. We really need to um, grapple with this particular identity. And then with reflection, we need to guide our students because reflection cannot just be done on, by themselves. We need to guide our students and each other even toward ecological conversion. And part of that is really challenging our lifestyle. No? I myself have to do this. How do we temper our consumption? How do we say no to the sale? Because especially if they're very attractive products, right? And then how do we discern what integral ecology means for each of us? Okay. And then the last part is, is adopting a sustainable community lifestyle. This was the one where we had the most difficulty. Um, because, for example, when we started to ban single-use plastics and we only allowed reusables in our cafeteria, some faculty members were initially angry with me. I was vice president then. And they were saying, it's so inconvenient. We have to go to the cafeteria and we have to bring our baunan, etc., etc. But, after a couple of years, it became a habit. I mean, people just went to the cafeteria to bring their own baunan, no? So we tried to avoid single-use packaging. We encouraged waste segregation and management so that the residual wastes that go to the landfill is very limited. And it saves us money because then less hauling for those services. Okay. So these are possible initiatives, and I am very, very sure you will find even more uh, initiatives that are really more relevant to UST, more relevant to your students, more relevant to the community. Um, I really prepared this presentation to be relatively short so that we can do more of a discussion and you can ask your questions because I really think this is very important to have more interaction with you, no? So what I'd like to present here is what Pope Francis said. We need educators who are capable of developing an ethics of ecology and helping people through effective pedagogy to grow in solidarity, in responsibility and compassionate care. Because when our hearts are authentically open to this universal communion, to this responsibility to everyone, the sense of fraternity excludes nothing and no one. And it becomes a truly common home. It becomes really an integral ecology that cares for our common home. So with that, I'll end my talk and maybe we can do more of the interaction with you. Thank you very much.